When I saw my husband scrolling through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, not because I feared being caught, but because of the messages. The ones I forgot to delete. I lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from his hands, but he pulled it back quickly, still reading. I watched his face change with every line, each word pulling us further from the life we once shared. Yes, he was about to find out. But not everything. His hands trembled as he swiped to the next screen, and I knew he was just one message away from destroying everything. That one single message. The one that would either unravel all the lies or tangle them deeper. Then the phone vibrated. A new notification lit up the screen. I saw his face pale as he read the name. He froze. Didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit whenever I panic. My nerves mixed with the horror of what I'd done. I could hear his breathing from across the room. Heavily, raggedly. That was the moment I'd been dreading the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. A mistake that changed everything forever. And now, I have no choice but to tell you the truth. Before I reveal the secret I've tried so hard to bury, leave a comment telling me where you're watching this from, and let me ask you, have you ever kept a secret so big it almost tore your life apart? The silence was louder than ever after my son left for university. His room stood still, neatly made, the air thick with the echoes of years gone by. I lingered in the doorway longer than I should have, running my fingers along the edge of his desk, pretending I wasn't already counting the hours since he boarded that plane. My husband barely noticed. He kissed me on the cheek that morning, grabbed his briefcase, and disappeared out the door like he always did. The scent of his cologne lingered for a moment longer than his attention. We had fallen into a routine, comfortable, dull, predictable. He was a good man. Loyal. Practical. Present in the logistical sense. But emotionally? That part of us had dimmed years ago, like a room we no longer entered. That evening, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there he was, my son's best friend. Taller than I remembered, broader too. His face had lost the softness of youth, replaced by something more angular, more assured. He held a duffel bag in one hand and an apologetic smile in the other. Hey. Sorry to drop in like this. I thought your son might have told you I needed a place for a few nights while I find something more permanent. He hadn't. But I didn't say that. Instead, I nodded, stepping aside, watching as he carried his things into the guest room, which used to be the playroom when the boys were younger. Strange how time folds in on itself like that. Dinner was quiet. My husband was late again, as usual, so it was just the two of us. I reheated something simple and we sat across from each other, exchanging small talk. I asked him about school, his plans, if he was seeing anyone. He smiled, polite, but kept most answers short. Then he asked, "And you? How have you been?" The question caught me off guard. No one asked me that anymore. At least not like they meant it. I told him the truth, or part of it. That I'd been reading more, walking in the mornings, thinking of volunteering somewhere. That I missed my son already. That the house felt too big now. He listened, really listened. Not like my husband, who'd nod with half his attention while scrolling through work emails. After dinner, he offered to help with the dishes. I waved him off, saying he was a guest, but he insisted. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink, and I caught myself smiling at something he said, really smiling. It startled me. Later that night, I sat in bed with a book open on my lap, eyes drifting to the empty side of the bed. My husband was still at the office. Or maybe with colleagues. Or just avoiding the quiet like I was. I thought of our guest down the hall, probably watching something on his laptop, unaware of how his presence had shifted the air in our home. The next few days followed a similar pattern. My husband stayed busy. Our guest stayed kind. And I started wearing a different shade of lipstick in the mornings. Subtle. Barely there. But different. I told myself it was for me. We started taking walks after dinner. Nothing extravagant, just around the block. Sometimes we didn't talk. Sometimes we did. He told me about his parents' divorce, how it had changed his views on relationships. I told him how quiet our marriage had become. I didn't mean to. It just slipped out. He looked at me with something between understanding and sadness. That look lingered in my mind longer than it should have. One morning, I came downstairs to find him making coffee. Shirt slightly wrinkled, hair tousled. He greeted me with a soft good morning that felt warmer than it should have. He handed me a mug before I could ask. I took it without speaking, my fingers brushing his. It was nothing. But also not nothing. That evening, my husband mentioned a late meeting. I didn't ask questions. Didn't pretend to mind. Instead, I made dinner again, and our guest and I sat under the soft kitchen light, talking about books we loved, places we wanted to visit. There was something about the way he leaned forward when I spoke, how he waited for me to finish a thought. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I brought out an old board game I found in the closet, one the boys used to play. We laughed at the worn pieces, at how dated the game had become. The laughter felt real. Unforced. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the hallway. He paused before entering the guest room, turned to say goodnight. His eyes held something, respect, maybe, or a question he wasn't ready to ask. I nodded and stepped away first. That night, I stood at the mirror longer than usual. Took in my reflection. The fine lines near my eyes. The way my blouse fell against my skin. I undid the buttons slowly, not out of ritual, but curiosity. Who was I becoming? As I lay in bed, the silence returned, but it felt different now. He was down the hall, and that changed everything. The question wasn't if a line would be crossed. It was when. And what that would cost me. The next morning began like any other. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft rectangles of light onto the hardwood floor. I heard the sound of someone in the kitchen, quiet movements, the soft clinking of glass, the low hum of the coffee machine. I sat up slowly, my hands pressed against the mattress on either side of me as if grounding myself. My husband had left early for a meeting. He'd kissed my forehead out of habit, his lips barely grazing my skin. I didn't open my eyes when he did. I waited until I heard the front door close before getting out of bed. When I entered the kitchen, he was there. Our guest. His back turned to me as he poured 2 cups of coffee. He wore a plain white t-shirt and loose pajama pants, and he looked entirely at ease, as if he'd lived here for years. I stood silently for a moment, watching him. The way he moved. Calm. Confident. Not like the awkward teenager I once knew. Something had changed, and I was starting to feel it in every cell of my body. He turned and handed me a cup without saying a word, his eyes meeting mine for just a second longer than necessary. I took it, our fingers brushing again, and this time I didn't look away. He didn't either. The silence between us was no longer casual. It was thick. Charged. I turned and walked to the window, sipping the hot coffee, trying to push away the tightness in my chest. I told myself I was being foolish, overreacting, making something out of nothing. But my body betrayed me. My breath felt shallow, my skin too aware. And the memory of the night before, the way he'd looked at me before saying goodnight, looped in my head like a scene I couldn't pause. Later that day, I sat at my desk in the small room I used for reading and journaling. I opened my notebook, staring at the blank page, pen in hand. I tried to write something, anything, but every sentence I started led back to him. His voice. His presence. The way he made the silence feel full instead of empty. I eventually gave up and went downstairs. He was sitting on the back patio, legs stretched out, a book resting on his chest as he stared up at the sky. I hesitated before stepping outside, unsure of what I even intended by joining him. But my feet moved before my mind could object. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun, and smiled. I sat beside him, keeping a comfortable distance. The late afternoon light cast everything in a soft glow, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and warm earth. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to remember the last time I'd allowed myself to just sit like this, without a to-do list, without a task to accomplish, without someone needing something from me. We talked about nothing for a while. The weather. A show he was watching. The kind of dog he wanted one day. I asked questions, not because I felt obligated, but because I genuinely wanted to hear his answers. He asked about my favorite books, my childhood, what I dreamed of when I was younger. His questions weren't polite, they were curious. And he listened to every word like it mattered. I told him things I hadn't told anyone in years. How I once wanted to live by the sea. How I wrote poems in college. How I almost didn't marry my husband. He didn't judge. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. As the sun began to dip, the sky a watercolor of pinks and oranges, I stood to go inside. He stood too. There was a moment, just a moment, when we faced each other in the doorway. Close. Too close. His hand moved, hesitated, and then gently touched my arm. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. We stood there, inches apart, our breathing shallow. I felt the weight of the moment pressing against us, something fragile and dangerous balanced between us. And then it happened. We kissed. It was brief. Soft. Hesitant. But the instant our lips touched, the world around me fell away. The backyard, the fading sunlight, the air, it all blurred. There was only the warmth of his mouth, the sudden rush of blood to my face, the dizzying realization of what I had just allowed. I pulled back first. Not out of shame, but shock. I looked at him, eyes wide, and he looked at me with something between apology and wonder. I turned and walked inside, my legs barely carrying me. Upstairs, I locked the door to the bathroom and leaned against the sink, staring at myself in the mirror. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes glassy. I looked alive. And that scared me more than anything. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, heart pounding, hands shaking. The sound of the faucet dripping filled the room. I thought of my husband. Of our son. Of what I had just done. And yet, there was no regret, only panic. Because I knew that this wasn't a one-time thing. Something had started, and I didn't know how to stop it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, playing back every detail. The way he looked at me. The way I didn't stop him. The way I didn't want to. I heard the creak of the floorboards once, faint footsteps down the hall, and I held my breath until they faded. By morning, the air felt different. He was quieter. So was I. We moved around each other carefully, as if afraid to break something delicate and unnamed. My husband returned home early, bringing noise and normalcy, and I clung to it like a lifeline. But nothing was normal anymore. Not for me. Not inside. I had kissed him. And now, there was no going back. The days that followed were full of silence, not the comfortable kind that once filled the spaces between me and my husband, but the sharp, buzzing kind that made my skin itch. The kind that made me hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, every glance. I carried the weight of that kiss in every step I took. It hovered in the air, lingered on the walls, pressed itself into the moments that used to feel simple. I kept busy. That's what I told myself. I cleaned the baseboards, reorganized the spice rack, watered plants that didn't need watering. I folded and refolded towels in the linen closet just to keep my hands from shaking. I told myself that if I stayed moving, stayed productive, I wouldn't have to think. Wouldn't have to feel. But the truth sat heavy inside me. I had crossed a line. Not just with him, but with myself. We didn't talk about it. Not even a word. The morning after, we passed each other in the hallway. He gave a polite nod, eyes downcast. I responded with a quiet hello, pretending not to notice the way his shoulders tensed as he passed. My husband had already left for work, unaware of the undercurrent building just beneath the surface of our house. At dinner, I forced myself to sit across from both of them. I made lasagna, a recipe my son always loved. The table felt too crowded, despite there being only 3 of us. My husband talked about a frustrating call he had at work, something about scheduling conflicts and late reports. I nodded at the right places, even laughed once or twice. But all I could feel was the heat of the other presence at the table, quiet, composed, pretending just as hard as I was. When I cleared the plates, our guest stood to help. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I handed him the sponge and left him alone at the sink, retreating upstairs with a weight in my chest that no amount of deep breathing could ease. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed with the lights off, listening to the sounds of the house. The creak of the floor near the staircase. The distant murmur of a late-night show playing softly in the living room. The turning of a faucet. Every noise meant something now. Every ordinary moment had become loaded. I tried to remind myself who I was. I was a mother. A wife. A woman who had built a life around structure and reliability. I was not reckless. I didn't break things. I maintained them. Cared for them. Kept them from falling apart. But something had already cracked. And there was no denying that the fracture had begun from inside. The next morning, I woke early and went for a walk before the sun had fully risen. The neighborhood was still, blanketed in a soft hush. I walked faster than usual, the cool air biting against my cheeks. I needed the rhythm of my steps to drown out the noise in my head. I walked until I couldn't feel my hands, and then I walked some more. When I returned, the house was awake. My husband was getting dressed, tying his tie in front of the mirror with mechanical precision. He asked if I wanted to join him for lunch later that week, his way of checking in. I said yes, surprised by how quickly the lie left my lips. He smiled, kissed the top of my head, and left. Later, I found our guest in the backyard, sitting on the edge of the wooden deck, sipping from a travel mug. He looked up when he heard me approach, but didn't speak. I sat beside him, careful to leave enough space between us, and looked straight ahead. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Me too." That was it. That was the entirety of our conversation. And yet, it felt heavier than any long apology could have been. We stayed there, in silence, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. That afternoon, I avoided the kitchen while he made lunch. I stayed upstairs and opened a drawer filled with old notebooks. I flipped through pages of my handwriting, poems I'd written in college, journal entries from when my son was small. There was one page, near the back of a blue-covered journal, where I had written in large, shaky letters, "Don't forget who you are." I had. I closed the book and tucked it back in the drawer. That evening, my husband came home with flowers. Not a grand bouquet, just a simple bunch of grocery store tulips. He placed them in a glass jar on the counter and told me he thought the house needed some color. I smiled and thanked him, my voice thinner than I intended. After dinner, he went to his study, and I found myself alone in the hallway with our guest again. We didn't speak. He looked like he was about to say something, but then seemed to think better of it. Later that night, I stood at the window in my bedroom, watching the trees sway in the breeze. I thought about the kiss. About the way it had felt both wrong and right at the same time. I thought about how much I craved to be seen, to be known, not as a mother or a wife, but as a woman. I thought about how long it had been since someone had looked at me and made me feel like I was more than just background. But most of all, I thought about what came next. Not in a grand, cinematic way. Just in the quiet, brutal realization that something had shifted. That I couldn't unfeel what I'd felt. Couldn't undo what had been done. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and whispered into the dark, not expecting an answer. I don't know what I'm doing. And the silence answered back, offering no comfort at all. The days drifted by like falling leaves in the wind, caught between the weight of silence and the pressure of unspoken things. There was an unshakable tension in the air, as though we were all walking on a fragile surface, afraid to make the wrong move. I spent most of my time at home, cleaning, organizing, keeping busy, trying to forget. But every corner of the house seemed to whisper a reminder. Every space we once shared, every chair at the table, felt somehow different now. I avoided being alone with him, our guest. I wasn't sure what to say or how to act around him. I didn't know how to face him without feeling the heat of that moment lingering between us like an invisible presence. The kiss. It haunted me, a constant undercurrent beneath everything I did. I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't even tell myself what I was really feeling. I was confused, lost between guilt and longing, caught in something I didn't understand. Something I had never meant to happen. I would glance at him when I could, when he wasn't looking, and every time, my chest would tighten. His gaze would linger on me just a moment too long, like he was waiting for something, maybe an invitation, maybe an apology. I wasn't sure. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His presence had become a constant in my days, his silence louder than any words. Then came the evening when everything changed. It was a Friday. My husband had gone out for a work dinner, and I was left at home with him, just the two of us. I couldn't escape the feeling that this was inevitable, that the universe had somehow conspired to bring us to this moment. I had the strangest sensation that this time, the quiet was different. It was heavy, thick with something that neither of us could name. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch, his feet tucked under him as he scrolled through his phone. He looked up when I entered the room, his eyes briefly meeting mine before darting away. "You're alone tonight?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. The space between us felt too wide, but also too close. My mouth went dry. I couldn't stop thinking about the last time we'd been alone like this, the last time I had felt something shift, something crack inside me. "I thought I'd catch up on some reading," I said, my voice betraying me with its tightness. I tried to force a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. He didn't respond at first. He just watched me, his gaze intense, almost searching. It made me feel exposed, like he could see through all the layers I had carefully constructed around myself. I walked to the bookshelf, pretending to look for something to read. My fingers brushed against the spines of old novels, each one a reminder of who I used to be, the woman who had once been full of dreams, who had once written poetry late into the night. I hadn't written anything in years. I hadn't even thought about writing in years. I picked up a book, opened it to a random page, and pretended to read. The words blurred in front of me as my mind wandered. What was I doing? Why was I avoiding the inevitable? I felt the weight of his presence behind me. He hadn't moved, but I could feel the shift in the air, the tension that had been growing between us, thick and palpable. He finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't want things to be awkward between us," he said. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." I didn't turn around, but I felt my heart rate pick up. The words felt like an invitation, a challenge, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept. "I'm not uncomfortable," I said, though the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. "I'm just adjusting." I could feel his eyes on my back, his gaze burning into me. It made my skin prickle. There was no escape from it. No avoiding the truth that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Then he did something unexpected. He stood up from the couch and walked toward me, slowly, deliberately. I held my breath, my pulse quickening with every step he took. When he reached me, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, inches away, as though waiting for me to make the first move. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to feel. All I knew was that the distance between us had closed, and now it was impossible to ignore. His hand brushed lightly against mine, and the contact sent a jolt through my body. It was a simple touch, but it felt like everything had shifted. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, his voice, barely above a whisper, "I can't pretend this isn't happening." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I was frozen, caught between the man I had married and the one standing before me. Without another word, he leaned in, just slightly, and kissed me. It wasn't like before. It wasn't soft or hesitant. This time, there was no hesitation. No confusion. Only the weight of everything that had been left unsaid, everything we had been avoiding. I could feel the tension in his body, the way his hands shook slightly as they rested on my shoulders. He pulled back after a moment, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something else. Something that felt too real. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice rough. "I shouldn't have." But I stopped him. I placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. The last thing I needed was another apology. We had crossed a line, and no amount of regret would change that. "I'm not sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but it felt true in that moment. "I'm not." He nodded, a mix of relief and uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I could see it in his face. He didn't know what to do either. Neither of us did. But we couldn't take it back. The kiss. The moment. The truth. It was already too late. And as the night stretched on, I realized something. This wasn't just about a kiss anymore. This was about everything that had been building between us, everything I had been avoiding, everything I had allowed to slip away. There was no going back from this. There was only what came next. I didn't know what that was, but I knew one thing for sure: we had both just taken a step into a new, dangerous territory. And neither of us was ready to turn back. The following days felt like a slow spiral, a steady pull toward a precipice I couldn't see but knew was there. The air in the house became thicker, heavier. Every glance, every movement seemed to carry weight now, like we were all carrying something we couldn't name. My husband continued to come and go, oblivious to the quiet tension between me and his son's best friend. And I was caught somewhere between the familiar and the unknown. I began to spend more time in my room, reading, or simply sitting by the window, watching the world go by outside. I needed the space, the distance. But the truth was, I was avoiding him. I wasn't sure how to act anymore, how to face him after what had happened. I had crossed a line, and now I didn't know how to navigate the aftermath. He hadn't spoken a word about the kiss. Not one word. I spent the days buried in my thoughts, replaying the moment over and over again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his eyes, the way his lips had brushed against mine. The intensity of it, the unexpectedness. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like everything I thought I knew about myself was now being questioned. One afternoon, after my husband left for a late meeting, I found myself downstairs in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where I usually prepared dinner. It felt like a lifetime ago that I used to enjoy cooking for the family, taking pride in the meals I made. Now, it all felt pointless. My hands moved mechanically, pulling ingredients from the fridge and placing them on the counter. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting to him. I wasn't sure when he came in. One minute, I was chopping vegetables, and the next, he was standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't turn around, couldn't. The air between us was electric, charged with something I couldn't control. I felt his presence in the room, in the way the space seemed to close in around me. I thought I could help, he said quietly, his voice low and tentative. I nodded, trying to focus on the cutting board in front of me. It's fine. I've got it, I replied, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. But he didn't leave. He stepped closer, his footsteps soft on the tile floor. I could hear the rustle of his clothes as he moved. He was just a few feet behind me now, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body. My pulse quickened. I couldn't do this. I couldn't be this close to him and pretend everything was fine. You don't have to pretend, he said, his voice a whisper now. I know you're avoiding me. I froze. He knew. Somehow, he knew. I didn't turn around, didn't look at him, but I felt the words like a blow to my chest. I wanted to say something, to deny it, but the truth was too clear. I was avoiding him. I was afraid of what would happen if we kept pretending. I'm not avoiding you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like a lie, but I couldn't say the truth. I didn't even know what the truth was anymore. There was a long silence, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. I didn't pull away. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed, feeling the heat of his touch seep through the fabric of my sleeve. It was the smallest of gestures, but it felt like everything had changed. I don't want to make this harder than it already is, he said softly. But I don't know how to go back to how things were. I don't think I can. His words hit me like a wave, and suddenly, everything felt too much. The guilt. The fear. The longing. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, trying to steady myself. When I opened them again, I met his gaze. He was waiting for me to say something, anything, but all I could do was look at him. I don't know what to do, I whispered. I don't know how to fix this. He stepped closer, and before I could say anything else, he kissed me again. It was different this time. It wasn't hesitant, and it wasn't quick. It was slow, deliberate, as if he was making sure I felt every moment, every touch. And I did. I felt it all, the pull in my chest, the way my breath caught, the way my hands shook as I reached up to touch his face. When we finally broke apart, I didn't move. I didn't know how to. There was nothing to say. No explanation that could make sense of what had just happened. The silence stretched out between us, thick and suffocating. We can't do this, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was already somewhere else. I know. But neither of us moved. Neither of us took a step back. We were stuck in that moment, trapped by something we both knew we couldn't escape. There was no going back to how things were. That much was clear now. I turned away then, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I needed space. I needed time to think, to breathe. I needed to find a way to fix the mess I had made, even though deep down, I knew it couldn't be fixed. As I walked out of the kitchen, I heard him move behind me. But he didn't follow. He stayed in the kitchen, and I was grateful for that. I needed the distance. I needed to be alone to figure out what I had done, what I was feeling, and what was going to happen next. But as I closed the door to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, I realized something. I had no idea what came next. I had no idea how to undo the last few days, how to go back to a life that no longer felt real. The one thing I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same again. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. The days that followed were a blur of unease. I went through the motions of my life, making breakfast, washing dishes, pretending to care about the conversations at the dinner table, but nothing felt the same. I was always aware of him, always aware of the space between us, and always aware of the weight of what had happened. It hung between us, a secret that neither of us spoke aloud, but that neither of us could escape. My husband remained oblivious, his work consuming him as usual. He noticed that I had become more withdrawn, but he attributed it to the stress of adjusting to an empty nest. "You're just adjusting to being alone now," he said one evening as he kissed me goodbye before leaving for yet another late meeting. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure he understood what I was really going through. The truth was, I was far from alone. I was just lost. Our guest, however, seemed to be everywhere. I couldn't avoid him. He was always there, at the breakfast table, sitting next to me as we watched TV, lingering in the kitchen while I prepared meals. Every glance felt like it carried meaning, every word spoken seemed to echo in the silence between us. But we never acknowledged it. Not directly. The house had become a stage for a performance, and we were all actors, playing our parts with practiced ease. I made small talk with him, always careful not to say too much. He did the same, though I could feel the weight of his words, the subtle undertone that suggested he, too, was waiting for something, perhaps a sign that things could go back to normal. But I knew better. There was no going back. Not anymore. One evening, after my husband left for another of his endless meetings, I found myself sitting in the living room, unable to focus on anything. I kept replaying the kiss in my mind, the way his lips had felt against mine, the heat of his touch, the way it had shaken me to my core. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. It was as if the kiss had opened something inside me, something I didn't know was there. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. A feeling of being seen, of being wanted. I hadn't realized how much I missed it until that moment. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice him standing in the doorway until he spoke. "Can we talk?" I turned and saw him standing there, his expression serious but hesitant. The way he looked at me made my heart skip a beat. I nodded, unable to find my voice, and motioned for him to sit down. He did, though there was a distance between us, like we both knew there were too many unspoken words for either of us to bridge the gap. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, "about what happened. About us." I held my breath, afraid to speak, afraid to hear what he was about to say. But at the same time, I couldn't pull away. I was trapped in this moment, this tension that had built between us, and there was no way to escape it. "I didn't mean to," he started, but I interrupted him, not wanting to hear an apology. "Don't apologize," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need an apology. I just need to understand." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for something, for permission maybe. I wasn't sure. But when he spoke again, his words were clear, firm. "I don't want to make this harder than it already is. But I don't think I can just pretend like it didn't happen. I don't think I can just walk away and act like nothing changed between us." I swallowed hard. "Neither can I," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. We sat there for a long time, the silence stretching between us like a thin, fragile thread. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain what had happened? How could I explain how it had made me feel alive again, something I hadn't felt in so long? I don't know what I'm doing, I finally said, my voice trembling. I don't know what we're doing. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the garden as if the answer was out there somewhere, hidden in the soft light of the evening. I watched him, my heart heavy, unsure of what to do next. I don't know what comes next either, he said quietly, his back still to me. But I can't keep pretending like we don't have to face this. Like this isn't real. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. This was real. This was happening. And there was no easy way out of it. I had made a mistake. We both had. But what came after that mistake? Could we move forward? Or was this something that would change everything? Maybe it's not about going back to what we had, he said, his voice softer now. Maybe it's about figuring out what we want from here. I turned to face him, my hands trembling at my sides. And what do you want? He paused, his gaze flicking to mine, and for a moment, it felt like the world around us had stopped moving. Like everything had narrowed down to just this moment. Just the two of us, standing at the edge of something neither of us could define. I want to be honest with you, he said, his voice steady. And I want you to be honest with me. I don't want to hide anymore. I nodded, my throat tight. I don't know if I can be honest. I don't even know what the truth is anymore. He took a step toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. The truth is that we're both here. Right now. And that means something. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. But the truth, in that moment, felt more like a question than an answer. What did this mean? What did any of this mean? I'm scared, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He reached out, gently placing his hand on mine. I am too. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I allowed myself to feel that fear. I allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had changed, everything that had happened. Because we were both in this. Together. Even if we didn't know what it meant. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to pull away. I stood there, in the silence that had come to define us, and waited for something to happen. Something that would tell me what I needed to do next. But nothing came. Nothing but the quiet, the lingering tension, the feeling that this moment, this fragile, uncertain moment, was the only thing that was real. And as the night stretched on, I knew there was no turning back. Whatever this was, it had already started. And I had no idea how it would end. But I couldn't stop it now. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The following days were nothing short of suffocating. I woke up each morning with a weight in my chest, a heaviness that settled in before I even opened my eyes. I couldn't escape it. The uncertainty, the feeling that something was broken but I didn't know how to fix it. It followed me through every mundane task, through every interaction, through every conversation I had with my husband. It was as though we were still playing our roles, but I no longer knew the script. I tried to focus on the things that used to bring me comfort. I went for walks, took longer showers, made dinner just like I always had. I tried to act like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. But it was all an act. It felt like the world around me was moving, but I was standing still. And I couldn't tell if I was losing myself or if I had already lost her. The distance between my husband and me had always been subtle, but it was becoming harder to ignore now. He was still affectionate, still attentive in the way he had always been, but I could see the cracks starting to show. He wasn't blind. He noticed the small things, the way I withdrew into myself more, the way I would stare out the window as if I were looking for something I couldn't name. One evening, after another late meeting, he returned home, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't go straight to the shower. Instead, he stood by the door for a moment, looking at me like he was searching for something. Something I had hidden. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice careful. I looked up, startled. He was standing in the doorway, his hand still on the handle, his gaze fixed on me with that unspoken question in his eyes. I could see the concern there. The worry. But I didn't know how to answer it. "Everything's fine," I said, the lie slipping out effortlessly, but it felt hollow as soon as it left my lips. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. He simply nodded and walked past me, heading to the kitchen. I stood there for a moment longer, my chest tight, watching him go. Later that night, after dinner, he sat next to me on the couch, his hand resting on the back of my neck as he kissed my temple. I forced myself to lean into it, to pretend I felt something. But it was like I was floating outside my own body, unable to connect with the emotions I used to feel. I felt like a stranger in my own life. "I think we need a vacation," he said, his voice low, as if trying to bring some sense of normalcy back to our lives. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe," I replied. "It's been a while." He was right. It had been a while. But I wasn't sure that a vacation could fix the growing rift between us. I wasn't sure anything could. The next few days were the same. I spent my time avoiding the truth, keeping busy with tasks that didn't matter. It was easier than facing what was happening, easier than acknowledging the quiet tension that had grown between me and our guest. The one thing that still unsettled me was how natural it felt when we were alone together. How, even without speaking, I could sense his presence in every room, every hallway. And how, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to step away from it. It was on the fourth day after the kiss when I found myself alone with him again. My husband had left for another business trip, leaving me with the quiet and the empty spaces that seemed to be growing between us all. I had been avoiding him, trying to keep my distance, but there was something about the stillness of the house that pulled me toward him. He was sitting in the living room, his legs stretched out, his eyes focused on the book in his hands. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to avoid whatever was still lingering between us. But another part of me, an honest part, a part one couldn't ignore, wanted to go to him, to close the distance and find out what was really happening between us. I took a deep breath and walked into the room. He didn't look up immediately, but I could feel his awareness of me, the shift in the air as I moved closer. "Hey," I said softly, my voice a little too high-pitched, a little too forced. He looked up then, his eyes locking onto mine. He didn't say anything at first. There was no need for words. The silence between us had already said everything. He set the book aside, his gaze steady, waiting for me to speak. I didn't know what to say. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, I simply stood there, caught between the urge to run and the desire to stay. My hands were trembling at my sides, and I felt the heat of his eyes on me like a physical touch. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately, but the expression on his face softened. It was almost as if he were waiting for me to make the first move, waiting for me to be the one to bridge the gap that had been growing between us. "I don't know," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. I think I just need to know if this is something we can talk about." I blinked, startled by the weight of his words. Something in his voice made me realize that this wasn't just about what had happened between us. It was about something deeper, something neither of us had been willing to face until now. "I don't know either," I replied, my throat tightening. "I don't know what to do with any of this. He stood up then, slowly, and took a step toward me. I didn't move, even though my body was telling me to step back. His presence was overwhelming, and the quiet tension between us was so thick I could almost taste it. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't want to hurt you either," I whispered, the words coming out more easily than I had expected. "But I'm not sure what we're doing anymore. I'm not sure what happens next." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't know either," he said softly. "But I can't keep pretending this isn't real." We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to hide. We had crossed a line, and now we had to figure out what to do with the consequences. And as much as I wanted to run away from it, I knew deep down that I couldn't. Not anymore. I finally took a step back, breaking the stillness. "I need some time," I said quietly, my voice shaking. He didn't say anything, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. He didn't push me, didn't try to change my mind. He simply nodded and stepped back, giving me the space I needed. But even as I retreated to my room, I knew it wasn't over. The hardest part was yet to come. The days after that conversation were filled with an almost unbearable quiet. Not the peaceful kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket, but the brittle kind of fragile, tense, ready to shatter at the slightest shift. I kept my distance, not just from him, but from everything. I moved through the house like a shadow, doing what needed to be done without truly being present. The weight of everything that had happened was finally settling over me, and it pressed down like a slow, relentless tide. I spent more time out of the house, taking long walks around the neighborhood, sometimes just sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot for no reason at all. I told myself I needed space, that time would give me clarity. But the truth was, I didn't want to be inside those walls. I didn't want to be near him. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, and I didn't know what to do with that. One afternoon, while I was out walking, I stopped in front of a small cafe. It was the kind of place I used to visit with friends years ago, when life felt simpler and the biggest worry I had was choosing between herbal tea or coffee. I went inside, ordered something I didn't really want, and sat by the window. I watched people pass by, listened to the murmur of conversations around me, and tried to imagine a life where none of this had happened. It didn't work. Eventually, I drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. I couldn't explain it. Just a shift, a small disturbance in the air. I walked inside, setting my purse down gently on the hallway bench, and called out to see if anyone was home. No answer. I moved through the house slowly, unsure of what I was looking for. When I reached the kitchen, I saw it, a small, unfamiliar key on the counter. It didn't belong to me. It wasn't from our house. I picked it up, examining the smooth metal, the small tag attached to it with a number scribbled in faded ink, 227B. A chill went through me. I knew what it was. I didn't want to admit it at first, but I knew. It was a key to that small studio I had rented months ago. The place I had told my husband was for writing, for solitude, for peace. The place where I had met him in secret, where the boundaries had blurred and crossed. The key shouldn't have been here. I never left it at home. I kept it hidden in the pocket of an old coat in the back of my closet. Carefully, deliberately. My hands began to tremble. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that it could have fallen out somehow, that maybe I had moved it and forgotten. But deep down, I knew. I knew I hadn't touched that coat in weeks. I stood in the kitchen, holding that tiny piece of metal, my heart thudding in my chest, when I heard the sound of the front door closing. I froze. My husband's footsteps moved slowly down the hall, and when he entered the kitchen, he stopped when he saw me. His eyes dropped to the key in my hand. There was a long silence between us. No movement. No words. Just that charged, suspended moment where everything you've built feels like it's on the edge of collapse. I found it in your coat, he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. I was looking for gloves. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed up, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. He stepped forward, slowly, until he was standing across the counter from me. What is it? He asked, though his voice betrayed the fact that he already knew. It's nothing, I said, too quickly, too flatly. A lie spoken from reflex, not intention. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. Don't do that. Don't lie to me. I looked down at the key in my hand, then back up at him. It's a place I go sometimes. To be alone. Alone, he repeated. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. Defeated. Is that all? I didn't answer. I couldn't lie again, but I wasn't ready to tell the truth either. I stood there, frozen by the weight of it all, by the reality that the thing I had been so careful to hide had finally made its way into the light. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I see, he said, and turned to walk away. I followed him instinctively. Wait. He stopped, not turning back. Have you been unhappy that long? That question pierced through me deeper than anything else he could have said. I wanted to say no, to reach out and explain that it wasn't about being unhappy, it was about being forgotten, being unseen. But the words felt small and empty now. It's not that simple, I whispered. No, he agreed. It never is. And then he walked upstairs, leaving me standing in the middle of the hallway, still holding that small key that now felt like a weapon. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there, breathing in the silence, trying to figure out what had just happened. I had thought I could control this, keep it separate from the rest of my life. I thought I could protect the people I cared about by keeping the truth hidden. But the truth had its own way of showing up. That night, I sat alone in my room, the key still on the nightstand beside me. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about everything it represented: freedom, escape, recklessness, desire, guilt. 1,000 emotions tangled together in a single object no larger than my thumb. And then I realized what I had to do. I didn't sleep. I waited for the morning, for the first trace of sunlight to stretch across the sky. And when it came, I got dressed quietly, slipped out the front door, and drove. To the studio. To the place that had become a symbol of everything I had wanted to feel again: youth, connection, purpose. But when I got there, I didn't go inside. I just sat in the car, staring at the door, the number 227B glowing faintly in the early light. I didn't know if he would come. I hadn't told him I was going. But some part of me hoped he wouldn't. Because some part of me knew. The drive back from the studio felt longer than it should have. The road seemed endless, the familiar sights of my neighborhood now unfamiliar, as if I were seeing them through someone else's eyes. The sun had started to rise, casting a pale light over everything, but it didn't bring the warmth I had hoped for. It only made everything feel more exposed, more vulnerable. I had been to that studio so many times before, each visit an attempt to escape, to run from the parts of my life that didn't fit, that didn't feel real anymore. But today was different. Today, I went there with the weight of everything I had been avoiding, everything I had tried to ignore. I hadn't gone there to find myself, I had gone there to lose myself. The guilt had settled into my bones, heavy and unrelenting. I could feel it in every step I took, in every breath I drew. I had crossed a line, and no amount of distance, no amount of time, could undo that. The truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know who we were anymore. I parked in front of the house, still not entirely sure what I was doing. The driveway was empty, but I knew that wasn't going to last. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, or what I was hoping for, but I had to be honest with myself. I was looking for answers. Looking for something to tell me that it wasn't too late to fix this, to go back to the way things were. I walked inside, the house eerily quiet. I paused at the doorway, scanning the familiar space. The kitchen. The hallway. The living room where we used to gather together, laughing and talking about our days. It felt like all of it was slipping away, like it was fading into something unrecognizable. I heard the sound of the front door opening, and I didn't need to look up to know who it was. My husband. He was home earlier than I expected. I thought you were at the office, I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed me, thin and brittle. I came home early. I had a few things to take care of, he said, his voice sounding distant. Is everything all right? I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. Yeah. I just needed some time. He didn't respond at first. Instead, he walked into the kitchen, as though he were trying to get a sense of the mood in the house. He didn't ask any more questions, but I could tell he was aware of something. He was looking for the cracks, searching for the things we hadn't spoken about. The things we had been avoiding. Dinner's almost ready, I said, trying to steer the conversation back to something normal, something that didn't feel like it was falling apart. He nodded but didn't sit down. He stood there, looking at me, his gaze lingering. Is this all just going to go back to normal? Are we just going to pretend everything's fine? I froze, the weight of his words crashing down on me. He was right. Everything wasn't fine. But I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know what we could do to make it right again. I don't know, I said quietly, my voice faltering. I wish I had an answer. There was a long pause, the silence stretching between us like a chasm that we both knew was there but didn't know how to cross. He turned away, looking out the window, as if searching for something outside to anchor him. I feel like we're drifting, he said finally, his voice low and raw. Like we're both just floating, pretending nothing's changed. But I can't pretend anymore. My heart ached at his words, the truth of them sinking in deeper than anything I had felt before. I had been pretending. Pretending to be the person I was, pretending to be happy, pretending that things were okay. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep hiding. I don't know how to fix this, I said, my voice breaking. I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to be. He turned back to face me then, his eyes soft but searching. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But I need to know that you're still here. That you're still with me. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. I wanted to tell him everything, the truth, the guilt, the confusion, but I couldn't. The words were trapped, tangled in the mess of emotions that had built up inside me. How could I explain what had happened? How could I explain what I felt? I am here, I whispered finally, my voice barely audible. But I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to be the person I was. I don't know if I can ever go back to that. He stepped closer then, his hand reaching out to touch my arm. I didn't pull away. I let him. His touch felt comforting, yet I knew it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the distance between us, the distance I had created. We don't have to go back, he said softly. We just have to figure out where we're going. Together. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that everything could be fixed. That there was still time for us. But I didn't know if I could fix this. I didn't know if I could undo what had already been done. I don't know how to fix us, I said, my voice shaking now. I don't even know if I can. He was silent for a moment, just standing there, watching me. Then, slowly, he nodded, as if he understood something I hadn't said aloud. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We have to. We have to try." I didn't know if I could, but I nodded. For him. For us. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about trying to go back to what we were. This was about something new, something uncertain, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. But as I stood there, facing him, I realized something: we couldn't keep pretending. Whatever was coming next, whatever this was, it was going to change everything. I wasn't sure where it would take us, but I knew one thing for sure: there was no going back. Not for either of us. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. The days after that conversation were difficult, and not just for the obvious reasons. The silence between us had become unbearable. I could feel it in every corner of the house, in every glance my husband gave me, in every moment I spent alone with him or with our guest. I was suffocating under the weight of it all. We hadn't spoken about what had happened. The kiss. The truth that hung between us, unacknowledged but felt with every passing moment. I knew he was waiting for me to say something, to do something. But I couldn't. How could I? How could I admit to what we had crossed? How could I explain what I had done, what I felt, when I wasn't even sure myself? The house felt like a prison. The walls closed in tighter with each passing hour. I could barely look at my husband without feeling a pang of guilt. I saw the way he looked at me, distant, unsure, and I hated myself for it. He deserved more. He deserved the woman he had married, the one who had promised him love and loyalty. But I had failed him. And now, I didn't know how to fix it. I spent most of my time in the garden, pulling weeds and rearranging the flowers. Anything to keep my hands busy, anything to keep my mind from wandering. But even the routine of gardening felt like a distraction, like I was avoiding something. I was avoiding the inevitable conversation that needed to happen, the one where I would confess everything. He came out to the garden that afternoon, just as I was finishing up the flower beds. He had a coffee cup in his hand, his tie slightly undone from a long day of work. He looked tired, older somehow. His eyes held a mixture of concern and something else. I couldn't tell what. Maybe disappointment. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I didn't answer at first. I was afraid to speak, afraid to open the floodgates that had been dammed up for so long. But I nodded anyway, gesturing to the empty bench near the flower beds. He sat down, the distance between us palpable. The silence between us stretched longer than it ever had before. "Why are we like this?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled between us. His voice was quiet but filled with emotion. I swallowed hard. "I don't know," I whispered. "We're just existing now," he said. "I don't know when we stopped being something more. I don't know when we became strangers." I looked at him then, really looked at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't blaming me, he was just broken. His eyes held a sadness that I had never seen before. It cut through me like a knife. This wasn't just about what had happened. This was about everything that had been missing between us for years. The love that had slowly faded, the connection that had been lost in the mundane. And now, we were both paying the price. I reached out then, not knowing what I was doing but knowing that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I touched his hand lightly, not as a sign of affection, but as a sign of understanding. The warmth of his skin against mine made my heart ache with something I couldn't name. "I don't know how we got here," I said softly, my voice breaking. "I don't know how I lost myself. But I'm still here. I'm still with you." He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond right away either. His gaze dropped to where my hand rested on his, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We both knew what had happened, but we hadn't been brave enough to say it out loud. I don't want to lose you, he finally said, his voice hoarse. I shook my head, feeling the tears welling up behind my eyes. I don't want to lose you either. The truth hung between us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to be honest. I allowed myself to feel the weight of what I had done, what I had allowed to happen. But even as I felt that guilt, I also felt something else, something I had buried deep inside for so long. A longing. A desire to rebuild, to fix what had been broken. To find our way back to each other. He took my hand in his, holding it tightly. His grip was firm, but there was a tenderness in it that made my heart ache. I'm willing to try, he said quietly. But I need to know you're in this too. That you want to fix this with me. I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me. I wasn't sure how we were going to fix things, or if we could. But I knew that I didn't want to let go of the life we had built, the love we had shared. I wasn't ready to give up on us. I'm here, I whispered. I'm still here. And I want to try too. We sat there in silence for a long time, hand in hand, as the world continued to turn around us. I didn't know where we were going, or what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But the question lingered in my mind as I looked out at the fading light in the sky, could we really go back? Could we ever rebuild what had been lost, or were we simply too far gone? The truth was, I didn't have the answer. And maybe I never would. But at least, for now, we were together. And that was a place to start.